You will discover the last splinters of a life half-lived, how the news of one's birth was celebrated by the whole barrio, feasts mounted by the same eager hands that now push dirt and rubble over your decaying body. They say in death, hair and fingernails continue to grow. What comfort it brings me to learn that long after our passing, some part of us will persist to disrupt the communion of the living that thrives and corrupts above. If not in life, may we forfeit their dreams, sanction their desires, may we harpoon their deepest devotions and find all this to be possible in death. May we come to realize that the door to heaven is an expressway tollgate, clogged by the vehicles of a crowded city and kept clean by the jubilant holidays. If death is design, consider the car crash, the weeping windshield, the greening of the stoplight. Consider the coiled traffic parting sideways for that one car to make its way to the lamppost, its approach both swift and head-on. Once, 5 friends inside a car phoned me minutes before they dived into a ditch outside my hometown. All 5 make it out alive. In keeping the tradition, we celebrate the deaths that do not happen yet. Thank hospice workers, light a candle, etc. My mother reminds me, had it been any other circumstance, I would have wedged my scrawny body between drunk friends on the back seat of the same car, and who knows if I come out as lucky. Luck? Luck holds no power here. There are no smoke alarms inside the gas chamber, which is to say what dies is meant to die. In the intersection of souls, you will find that death is a skillfully crafted chain reaction of things. The word accident bears no meaning to a hand that writes and revises. The acid holes in my stomach have been written, and so have the poison clouds in my lungs. Among all spontaneous human combustions recorded in history, the 6th common characteristic is this: all bodies leave a trail of greasy, fetid ashes in the area of explosion. The true tragedy of death isn't in the loss, but in the utterances of such loss, in the bent back tulips poised on our stones, and how the living is left to clean up what greasy, fetid mess we leave behind. Juxtaposing Hotaluna, page 39. A blood-splattered painting hangs regally in a corridor, increments of the artist's DNA, some overt political message, an antiquated brass frame, deftness, dexterity, taste. A woman in shiny pearl earrings stays at the hotel, smokes ese along the cobblestone streets of Calle Crisologo, a microcosm of Spanish occupation in rural Ilocos, where a plume of smoke erupts from her mouth, lungs brimming with ash and heat. The rate goes 4,000 pesos a night, not bad for its middle-class occupants. A pool, an intercontinental breakfast, a blood-splattered painting perched outside your door to decorate your mornings with, as a warning, perhaps. We will stroll around the city made of stone. We will meet at 8:30 sharp, travel by foot past old walls, red bricks leaking out of concrete like gushing skin. We will have steaming white rice for stamina, meat and distinctly vegan sauté for protein, something sumptuous that will say we are neither of this land nor new to it. What hybrids can find love in a city that sells horse shit and decay by the pound and be so in love still that we are drunk after 2 beers, unperturbed by the click-clack of the kalesa, how spit and sweat are traded in gleaming currency, how we barter for more as soon as we run out. The hotel staff will find our sheets disparate from their appointed beds, a piece of yellow forming outward from the center. Nothing that good detergent can't fix in Hotaluna, where it's business as usual. The philosophy of forgiveness resides not in the abandonment of history or the virtuous denial of our pain, but in the cruelty of remembering. How we preserve the cages we were slaughtered in, how we bend our knees in worship of the wealth that flourished on our hunger, how we build highways out of stones we collected on our broken backs, how we slice off our tongues to learn the language of our enemies, how we create monuments out of bomb shelter ruins, how 30 pesos per person is what it costs to enter bell towers built in the names of those who enslaved us, how so willingly we surrender our last change, how we take the shape of our oppressors and sell it back to them, complemented with the finest total arrangements our temperate sense of selves can offer, certain that they come back for more. A Study of Anger, page 43. I cannot say fully that I understand anger. Is it a carnal form of hate, distinguished by the potent diction, almost eloquence of how it wrecks? Is it a world upon the discovery of fire, how ruthlessly and decidedly it scorched the tongues of those who dare pick its face? Is it the wearing off of the value, the violence in which the veins protest the sober submission eclipsing the human soul? Is it a dying language, or a language fervent and festering in its attempt to be alive, or a language so alive that the gods are hell-bent on killing it? Once, I took my anger on a field trip to the largest labor force known to man, a factory of alleged virtues, its business to sanitize anger, to exhume it from and for the human body. No silver was to be offered, only that anger be traded for penance, for mercy, for gift cards. The gunfire backdrop unlearns its course in callous ways, the blaring sirens slither through the cracks of Metro Manila traffic. Blood becomes the final coat finish of a sturdy road. I walk home with a newly prescribed dictionary, thick, glossy, the word anger missing from its pages. I stagger towards conviction, hoping to find some semblance. Only conviction is anger's distant cousin from New York, Milan, somewhere first world. The Bisaya word for anger is soko. I live in a city whose language desecrates my native tongue, softens my anger inside a petri dish, and calls it giving up. Anger still sits heavy at the backs of our throats, swollen and tangled, nuzzling at the prim of these windpipes we so desperately choke back at the dinner table that our mouths clatter upon the saying of grace. There is no God in the city, no benevolent one at least, only a wasted blue-collar worker of a God, limping, middle-aged, about to lose his job. He carries the weight of all our genocides, our tyrannies, and our civil wars to the doorstep, an uninvited guest knocking for bread.
So, it's the fellows first before the panel. So, anyone?
Fellows. We'll volunteer someone. Siano, I think.
Can you volunteer myself?
Nag-change outfit ka naman ako na.
Okay. Two things I noticed about the suite of Alfie. First, that it's half of it is politically charged, and half of it, I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a longing for home, or for where you come from. That's what I noticed. For example, spontaneous human combustion. First, you talked about death, and here, first 6 stanzas, I remember yung Sandman. One part, my favorite episode ng Sandman. Well, Sandman is, or Morpheus, the god of dreams, and his sister is death. So my favorite episode na sa graphic novel is hinahanap ni Sandman yung purpose niya. Kasi he was kidnapped by wizards. So when he was finally freed, he lost some of his power and his perfect purpose in life. So death, his sister, kinausap siya. Sabi niya, there's this one poet, long forgotten, who wrote about the true meaning of death. So sabi niya, death is parang, it's not really a bad thing, it's actually a good thing. It's freedom from pain, from suffering, from everything. And I think people, including Morpheus, Sandman, they've forgotten the purpose of death, and that's why his sister Death continues to work each and every time. Sinusundo niya mga so I remember that na. And then suddenly you go back, you talk about the car crash. Not sure if this is true or if it happened in real life, but I'm guessing it's true. So there's this going back to the self or to the roots. That's one. Then study of anger. Number 3. The Bisaya. First you were saying, number 1, you were saying you kind of fully understand anger. Then number 2, this is again politically charged. I think this is a protest or a rally, something. Then number 3, you go back to you talk about the Bisaya word for soko. Well, knowing that you're from Butuan, right? So again, there's a longing for home. And then, Butuan and gangsters. Yeah. Ang question ko lang dito, hindi ko na-gets eh. Bakit gangsters? Yun lang. And then, yeah, finally, heritage. Actually, this is my favorite. Kasi parang dito ko nakilala lalo yung writer. Because it's like a confessional of his background, his family. So mother is an artist, father is an artist. Two elder siblings. Yeah. Tawa ako dito first and second draft. So you're the final draft, so you're the perfect one. So there, then the rest, juxtaposing Hotel Luna, Japanese coastline. I feel that it's very very political, and it's a commentary on what happened in the past, what's happening now, and the what ifs, the wishful thinking, what could have been. So another one is a measurements. Gusto ko lang i-point out yung isang line dito. Love letter or peace treaty, though I suspect it has its doubts. The way the poet sees the same world everybody else sees, but always from a tilted angle. Gusto ko lang point out kasi coming from training in journalism, it's the same thing. Almost similar yung how a poet and a journalist works. So kami, we were trained when covering or doing our legwork and writing the story, we were trained to always look for an angle. So kapag marami kang competition na reporter, jolly o TV, so it's your job to look at the same event on a different perspective. Yung mas magiging magugustuhan ng tao. It's the same thing as kung paano yung how the poet sees the world or the situation or how he observes things around him or her. So I like that here. And finally, since I know kasi that you're a spoken word artist, parang when I was reading your work, iniisip, parang ni-read aloud ko siya kung pang spoken word ba to or pang ano lang, pang written lang. So, medyo hindi ko na-distinguish yun. Pero, dun sa mga binasa mo, I think yung spontaneous human combustion is more on okay siya for spoken word talaga. And yeah, that's okay.
Hi, Alfie from C. The first time I read the suite, actually, for some reason, ito yung pinakaunang suite na binasa ko out of the many collections of poems that were sent to us. The first time I read it, I read the title, and then I read some of the titles already of the poems. Sabi ko, I kind of knew that the author is Closeted for some reasons. Why? Because it wasn't that flamboyant. It's very mechanical, which is, it resonates very well sa title ko lang. It's very mechanical, man and machine, mechanism. It's very urban, cosmopolitan, which is, I think, a standout. This particular suite is a personal favorite of mine on a lot of levels. My favorite na hindi mo binasa is the moon addresses her enemies. I loved it on several layers, such as it talks about the moon, being this Helena Bonham Carter kind, addressing her enemies from a planet that is a few light years away ba ang moon? Hindi ko lang alam. But it talks about rape, politics, and machismo, which is exactly, and it's kind of projecting, sabi ni sabi ng moon, she's sort of projecting lunacy, which is, di ba, lunacy is rooted sa word na luna, which is moon. Sabi niya, all you men looking at me, pointing your fingers at me are lunatics. I'm not, hindi ako yung lunatic because even if you name that particular adjective after me, kayo talaga yung totoong lunatics. I kind of like the reference then towards, of course, Libulan and then Lubuan, and I'm not sure if it's part of your Visayan heritage. So this, I think, is the strongest poem that I've read in the entire collection. My next favorite is the poem called Butuanan Gangsters, because it sort of romanticizes the Robin Hood, the localized flavor, OTJ kind of vibe bust. It had that flair of that gangster kind. So, yun lang for now. I'll leave the rest to others.
Who's next? Here,
Tom?
So generally, I actually just want to talk about 2 or 3 small things that cut across it. First is actually I wanted to jump off across Peno's point, the idea of the orality of it, how some of the poems actually feels like it's meant to be read out loud. I'm not saying that they can't be read on the page because some of them actually have nice line cuts and they follow along cleanly. But there are occasionally, in a few of the lines, it shows that the line cut could have been cleaner. In particular, for example, spontaneous human combustion, where it says, to disrupt the communion of the living that. So as a unit, the line itself could have been made cleaner by moving that. Or
So,
I like Measurements as a poem on the page. I was just reading it, I love the lines. And the second point coming from this, and generally what I found cutting across a lot of the poems, is the idea of interrogation. A lot of the poems seem to be very interrogative. They ask a lot of questions. In juxtaposing mo Hotel Luna, I got the idea of going back and revisiting histories, along with Japanese coastline. Same in beautiful poem, The Moon Addresses Her Enemies, as mentioned. There's also the questioning of subjects, and this, along with heritage. I mean, the question also of the mother, the question of the self in the family, and so subject-wise, I enjoyed a lot of these poems based off that, and the way it, especially if you consider it as very oral, is extending outward your questions to the world and the energy packed within these questions. That's just generally my take on this suite.
Okay, thank you so much. Who's next? I have the mics. Ako muna. Oh wow, very impressive collection from Alfie. You know, poetry is the most intimate genre. It's the lyric in particular. It's a genre of the private life. It's very difficult to find a genre that compares to the way the lyric poem actually forces the reader to assume the subjectivity of the author. When you read a poem, you become the speaker of the poem. So a lyric poem is a script for performance. Actually, very easy to transition from lyric poetry, I think, to performance or live art. And what I like about this is that I am ennobled by the collection. I'm turned intelligent by the collection. These are intelligent pieces. They're ruminations about highly profound things. The first poem, Measurements, is an Ars Poetica. It's about poetry. And the comparison being made is the crane, which carries a weight, but does not entirely know, the nature of the weight, nor even the exact weight of the weight. And poem also has that sort of poetry also has that imprecision. But the paradox in poetry is that through the imprecision is precision, meaning it's through the indirect that poetry can actually be more direct. it can get to the truth better, precisely because it uses indirection, right? And it's a lovely, lovely paradox that the poem explores and wonderfully describes. You don't stumble across any lapses. There aren't. I didn't find any actually. If at all, just probably punctuation things. It can be fixed easily. But if it's true that Alfie is transitioning from spoken word to print poetry, this is a wonderful, wonderful transition. Much of the spoken word poems that I know about actually will not succeed on the page because they are half of what their power is actually in the immediacy, in the delivery also, and therefore in probably the violation of all these different things that you require in print poetry. But if you have transitioned from that to this, then you have done so successfully that you don't really find traces anymore of any mannerisms from that phase in your writing career. Spontaneous human combustion is a meditation, it's a rumination on death, and just how inescapable, absolute, unavoidable, random, and beyond explanation it is. Right? And of course, the answer to the question of how we conquer death is an old answer. It was John Donne who gave us the answer. You conquer death by dying. Because after you die, death is dead too. Your death dies with you. And that's how you conquer death. Okay? The poets don't really offer too much consolation as far as the topic of death is concerned. They will just get you more depressed. But of course, there are many other philosophical ways of looking at death, and you don't really explore them anymore. Because there's a certain darkness to the way you approach death here, because you say that the tragedy of death is that it actually leaves a mess. And for the dead, it's not this problem. It's the living who actually have to clean up, right? And it's relatable on many layers or levels because you really do have to. You are subjected to so much trauma, even when a loved one passes away. You go through the ritual of the funeral and all of that, and there's so much mess to clean up, right? So it's true on that level. But it's really death that makes life, life. You know that. There's a beautiful poem called The Delicate Plummeting Bodies by Stephen Dobbins, where death is metaphorized as a young boy who leaves the world because he's tired of constant abuse and complaint. And the minute he leaves the world, everything turns meaningless. People don't get out. People become ugly because they don't want to get out of bed. Why hurry, right? Time does not have any meaning anymore, right? And then money has no worth. So economies collapse. Governments have to do something, and so they actually get people to pose as volunteer dead, but then they grow tired and sneeze while they pose as corpses. The businessmen gather together, and they're the ones who actually have a plan. They go to death, and then is this little boy with playing with a ball, round, red with the absence of life, or something like that. Beautiful image. And then they tell death, we're going to put your likeness on every money of the world, in the world, and then death says, it's there already. We're going to make you king. I am king already. And then they say, we cannot live without you. And death says, I will reconsider. I will consider your offer. And then things start dying slowly, the bacteria first, no one notices. Until finally, the birds, all the birds that should have died since death left the world, die at the same time. And so from the streets, right, they look up at the sky and all these birds start plummeting, right? And then cries of welcome rise up to meet the delicate plummeting bodies, okay? The point is that death makes life life. Without death, there's no life. Okay, so that is the value of death. Now, rumination, again, you have your own, and this is your own sort of offer. And I think it's very dark, but it also has its validity, as I said. It is messy, okay? Hotel Luna, initially I thought it would be some kind of ekphrasis, because there's this painting that has blood stain. I was thinking, oh, okay, is this going to be a poem about art? But it's not. It's a strange poem because it's 3 parts, and the hotel is the occasion, the stay in the hotel, the what do you call that? The visit to vegan and the occupancy of this room in this hotel becomes the occasion to talk about injustice and forgiveness. And the backstory seems to be that the two people, the we, probably have had a quarrel, they're probably lovers. We don't know, because suddenly there is forgiveness, and the forgiveness being discussed is about the inequality in the world, the haves oppressing the have-nots, all of these things, but not about probably the forgiveness that has to be discussed in relation to the two people. So that's the great absence in this poem that probably is cute, but you know, I am such a busybody, I want to know what the backstory is. And I don't know if you want to put that in as part 4. Japanese coastline is about the irreversibility of human cruelty. If we reverse engineer all the cruel things that humanity has done to itself, will we actually be able to save the soul? This reminds me of Adorno. You know Adorno, right? Theodor Adorno, a very famous Frankfurt School philosopher. The Frankfurt School was a group of Marxists based in Frankfurt. And they were all disenchanted, like most Marxists. Very disenchanted. He believed that capitalism had so permeated every nook and cranny of human reality that even art, which is the last bastion of agency, is reduced to its fungible or market value. So everything is instrumentalized. And so where do you look for human agency? He actually has a quote pertaining to poetry. He says, after Auschwitz, writing poetry is barbaric. After Auschwitz, writing poetry is barbaric. And he means to say, it's hard to actually figure it out. It's a bit of an enigma. But then there's some elaboration of that. He's particularly leery or suspicious of lyric poetry that prettifies suffering, that aestheticizes suffering. That's why I was bringing it up in relation to Mariel's quest to represent in her collection all these different cuento of suffering. You benefit from it. You build a career on it, talking about the suffering of so many other kinds of people. And he actually is saying something else, something more profound than that. Humanity has already committed genocides. Right? Auschwitz is a very good example of the systematic annihilation of a people, right, by a nation. It's nationalism in its most crazy, fanatical form, right? And any attempt to lament, bewail, condemn it using art cannot exculpate the civilization that actually made it happen. You know, you see all these accounts of the Schutzstaffel, right? The SS guards. No? These are the Nazi guards. They were shoving people into the gas chambers. They were whistling and humming Beethoven tunes. Very highly civilized. Art. Neck deep in art, swimming in civilized art. And they were doing that. So art cannot redeem humanity. Disabuse yourself of what we already know humanity is capable of, which is great evil. So, yes, this is a poem that resonates that idea. And we should be very careful, I think. What is the only suffering and pain we can talk about? Probably our own, without much ethical question about it. Right? And if you bring in other people's suffering, there was this big debate. Remember the Mindanao massacre? What was that? Mindanao Ampatuan? 2 anthologies were made around the same time by Filipino poets, right? There are 2 online anthologies. One was High Chair, the other one was Can de la Cruz, etc. The High Chair people were Adornians. And then the lyric poets were on the other side. And the Adornians, led by Chingby Cruz, they were really blowing the whistle on, we cannot benefit from this. We cannot just so easily immerse ourselves in this. We have to be ironic and think and make the form of our poetry about something so awful itself resonate our unease, you know. And see, it would have been a good time to talk about aesthetic issues, except the debate became personal and people just became a name-calling thing. And people were just slinging mud at each other. Sayang, kasi it would have been nice to talk about that debate, diba? Of what is the ethical responsibility of the artist facing the great topic of human suffering, right? Confessional poets know all about human suffering, they talk not about nothing else, but what's nice is it's about their own, alright? Which is alright. So then you get accused of like making a beauty pageant of your own pain, which I think is its own problem. Okay, A Study of Anger is a nice poem, it's a linguistic sort of puzzle. I sense the anger here is about the absence of anger in a way, in a country where righteous indignation is not real enough. So it's a poem that is indignant about the absence of indignation. In a country where suko is suko, right? Where you have that, no? And so it's someone who brings that regional difference. So it's beautiful in that sense, actually. Alfie, that you bring in your language here, no? In an NCR setting. The Factory of Alleged Virtues is Manila? I'm not sure where it's at.
It's not geographically contextualized. It's this unspoken realm
Of
sadly
do-gooders.
of this conversation among people that sanitizes our version of anger.
Ah, okay. Alright. So that's a bit vague, so that can be kind of clarified. The one I like best is The Moon Addresses Her Enemies, because it's a dramatic monologue. You assume the position of a speaker that you literally are not. You are not the moon, or who knows. You have a wonderful epigraph of how apparently during the Cold War, the two warring big nations, superpowers, were plotting to conquer the moon, or something like that. And this is the moon answering back. And lovely, wonderful thoughts on the audacity of humanity to do that, no? to even think of doing that, right? I just don't like the ending. To observe only from a distant telescope, quite distant. Only from a telescope, I suppose. But you see, the moon is actually so close that the moon is accessible. Among of all the heavenly bodies, it's the one closest to us. So I'm not sure about the ending. But I do like the fact that the moon is very mataray and is putting humanity in its place. Sabi niya, do you despise the lighthouse I become in the dark? How it denies you the power you hold at night? How it clothes your victims from the nakedness you inflict? Do you despise how it unrapes them? Unrapes them. Beautiful. How unabashed you were after setting fire to the women of your people. Which gypsy harlot, whore, you aim for me, your planet's lone companion, looking to burn down what you cannot defeat. Diba? Bongga. It's it's a feminist poem because the moon is identified with women. Yes, and it has that. Butuan of Gangsters is your ode to your hometown. You really would like your hometown to prosper, so to speak. And if this proverb is true, then magkalat ka na lang ng spare change everywhere, di ba? But then you kind of slap yourself awake in the end. It's just all you need is spare change so you can afford the pedicab ride. Mura lang ang gastusin sa Butuan, no? The cost of living is low. Heritage is your queer poem. So in this whole collection, everything is a very sort of universal meditation in a way. But no, not universal with the Butuanon and the Suko, Visayan. But then with heritage, you talk about your upbringing. And I like the fact that you're making a parallel between the raising of children and the making of art. And how the parents are both artists and the queer child is the draft. Or the queer child is the weird work of art. And naganda the image of a mouth of a boy learning how to speak. And this is the speech of that boy. Right? So lovely, entirely wonderful and publishable as it is, in my opinion. More. Congratulations, Alfie. Yes. Pascal. Wala na.
Nico will say something.
Sarado na. Sarado na tindahan.
Magsara na ng bar.
So, what I really love about this suite is its usage of the personal and the philosophical. And the philosophical is a personal experience as well. And then elevating it or expanding it into a political discourse. And most of it is about class and gender. So there's always that dimension, elevation. I agree that there are really tight poems here, and my favorites are also the Moon and the Butuan Gangsters. I feel like in the Butuan Gangsters poem, you show versatility because it's the simplest linguistically, but it's so clean. And what really shines is the emotion to me because there's such a defiant tone against other places that enjoy more wealth, but at the same time like a sense of community, a really strong community, wanting your own community also to prosper. I'm not the expert of it, but I found some things worthy, I guess. So I'm not like the expert, but for example, in spontaneous human combustion, language in its process and ephemeral in its space, I found not necessary. And then the stanza with we come to realize that the door to heaven is an express toll gate of the jubilant holidays. I felt like you didn't need it there as well because the jump to if death is the sign and then how you describe how other cars would part so that single car that's destined to crash. I mean that's such a stark image to me already that stands before it kind of weakens it for me. If you see crowded city, empty, clean, jubilant holidays, to me was very predictable in its phrasing. So I feel like that stanza, is weak compared to what it precedes. In Japanese coastline, just a small nitpick. I wonder what will happen if you align the ifs, or is it intentional that we put the if we at the end, and then I'm just thinking aesthetically on the page. If all the ifs align, what is the effect? And then in a study of anger, I think Sir Neil explained its merits. My question is the second stanza, not stanza, second, the numeral, the second numeral. Once up to Metro Manila traffic. I know that you said that it wasn't a tangible place, but you're anchoring it in a metaphor that's geographic, and you use the field trip, and because the field trip is this idea that you come out of your usual surroundings and you see something out of the way that you don't normally see. And from that, I wanted to see something more because I want to understand, because this is the turning point of the persona. After he visits this factory of alleged virtues, that's when he realizes this anger that he hasn't been expressing, or he's not free to express. So I think it's such a crucial turning point in the poem that I wish that was more dramatized, if that's the right term. Because no silver was to be offered, only the anger can be traded for penance, for mercy, for gift cards. I think it doesn't do justice to the vision that you have. And I know that based on the language that you're capable of doing it. But I would love for that to be, dramatized more. Because you immediately, at the form as it is right now, you immediately go back to the Metro Manila traffic, which I feel maybe is like the default surrounding that you left for the field trip. So then it's such a brief moment, but it turns the persona that I just want to savor it more, I guess.
the collection, let me rephrase. This was the kind of collection that I was looking forward to for this workshop. Something that was easy to read, but not easy on the brain, on the mind. The poet knows his sentences, his language, and he knows how to use them to philosophize. So you see, small idea. He ruminates on so many things and takes on, acquires the vitality of different kinds of. He becomes. He creates different personae, that help us, ruminate on the nature of existence. My favorite here is the first, measurements, which is, as Neil has mentioned, is an art poetica. Flawless. I just have a question about the last line, of the preciseness of things. Will it make a difference if we use precision? I'm not so sure, but the poet, for me, has made a choice, and I respect that. I love this. It's birth from place of guilt. That's the other one that I am asking myself if it's the best word, but nonetheless, okay sa akin, yung choice niya. I like the variety, the linguistic variety offered by the poet in the collection. As you can see, he knows how to, manipulate sentences, short, fragments, different kinds of sentences. Even a play with punctuation marks. There are two poems here that actually do not have periods, right? And so my question is, will the poem's integrity change if we put a period at the end of the sentences? My hunch is that it won't make a difference, and therefore putting the comma, putting the period would be okay. Parang, is it really important that there's no period at the end of the sentences? So I think, I'm inviting the writer to mull over that. Okay, is it really necessary? Okay. Number two, I was a bit, this is what Mr. Nico already mentioned, the form of the Japanese coastline. I think okay lang na isang break siya, coastline, di ba? But is the poet going to play with the we? Parang ano lang, parang Gwendolyn Brooks. We real cool, we, but I don't think there's enough room for that, given the structure already, given the ideas in place, will it matter if we put the we, if we push the if we beginnings, at the beginning of each stanza, of each thought unit, so that if we would all be appearing flush left, okay? And last, the Butuan gangsters. I'm not so sure. For me, this is the weakest poem. It's a very, very easy ending. Parang after all the philosophical rumination, you give me this wish, not have enough points. Right? Parang, I don't think, I also feel it's among the poems in the collection, this is the one that approximates prose the most. But that's just me being me a bitch, right? Baka bitch lang ako or something. Pero feeling ko kasi may isang pirma na lang, prose na. So,
what is that? Sorry, I wasn't.
The Butuan gangsters. Are they so mean they serve prose? Okay, so ito parang feeling ko it doesn't feel poetic enough yet to be compared to the others. Gumaganon siya. So I invite the writer to work on it or to rethink the form, the line cuts, ordination, the rhythm of the poem, and of course, the images. Kasi ang maganda sa dula nung mo ay nag-soar siya, no? Meron kang you know, you have your way of making language soar to also approximate the philosophical ruminations in the poem. This one does not. No, it actually is. It approximates what it's supposed to do. Let the points fall. No? Pero hindi nga maganda yun, di ba? Parang it doesn't fly. This one. No? Parang maybe you can consider that. Okay. I like the ending of Heritage. Yun. So generally, I'm so happy. Whenever this collection, I'm Howie na. Kasi mature na yung writer, no? Kasi dapat our vision, our language must match our vision, no? And among the collections that I've read, this is the one where there is the smallest disparity between the two, and so I congratulate.
Hello po. With regards to sa suite ni Alfonso, I fell in love with it. I loved reading it. It's a very smart collection. Yun nga, very intelligent. With regards dun sa register of words, usually I'm medyo may ano ako doon. Pero the thing is, it's very consistent in such a way that I just immerse myself into reading this person's thoughts. So, among all of the pieces, I also like The Moon Addresses Her Enemies. I think it's a very sassy, it's a very sassy piece, so I can really feel the voice of the poet shining there. But with regards to measurements, I like the integration of wittiness in the piece. For example, how the last line of the preciseness of things is the most imprecise line structurally among all of the stanzas. So for me, I felt that it was very playful. Ang ano ka lang is, for me, I guess maybe it's because it's not found here, but coming from Mindanao, as a Mindanaoan poet, I would also really love to see more about Butuan rather than just Suko, which I also know. And everyone, I think, in Mindanao and Cebu also knows about Suko. But there's something deeper with Suko than just the word anger, Suko. So for me, for example, I tested that sort of challenge in seeing Alfonso as a Mindanaoan poet with regards to dun sa Butuanan gangsters. However, dito, this is where I sort of felt that I guess maybe there is this examination of yourself slowly becoming a foreigner to your own city in a way. Like for example here, you have this sentiment of wanting to give money to your hometown, wanting to give street children your coins. So in a way, it felt, for me personally, I felt that it is how, like when you go to Ciudad, sa Manila, so sa mga for example, kapag ako taga Samal noon, ngayon taga Davao na, and then you look back, you want to really help your family back there in the island or in the rural areas, and then you have this very parang pagkapatron mo na thoughts that slowly, I guess, I can see it here. So perhaps it is also indeed an examination of you moving to Manila from Butuan. But yes, so I'm really hoping that with your capacity already, with your set style, that I'd see more about Butuan as well. And I've been there, and they're very happy because they have a mall now. So, nagsaselebrate sila, yes. Di ba? Mga Butuan talaga. G-Mall, Gaisano. Oo. Yes, or yun, ang dami. Anyway, sorry. Also, with reading the piece, the poems remind me a lot, or perhaps it's because of your influences, a lot of American writers of color. Perhaps, like I see Sally Wenmao, I see Ocean Vuong, yung mga linguistic tendencies mo such as which is to say, or how. I see it in a lot of color writers of color in the US. So I think it's just something that I noticed. I don't think that it's a good, very good thing or a very bad thing. So napansin ko lang siya. But yeah, it's a really solid collection, very smart, and I'd love to read a book of yours definitely one day. Thank you.
Mag-start na ako sa spontaneous human combustion. Since marami nang nasabi about this poem, I think for me, I'd like to describe this one as a beautiful prose with line cutting. Kasi I think it works for me as a prose and spoken poetry rather than written poetry for me. And then sa Japanese coastline, I like that it's somehow rhetorical kasi it's like it leaves something sa readers to think about because parang serious siya ng questions and medyo curious lang ako kasi sa Hotel Luna, parang it talks about colonizers and oppression and how we try to please our colonizers, something like that. And then biglang you talk about the bombing of the in Japan, something like that, or that's how I understand it. And then it's like, why the sudden sympathy for the Japanese who also, you know, occupied the Philippines, something like that. I'm just curious. And then gusto ko rin yung yung first person point of view ng the moon addresses her enemies kasi it works because the persona is very authoritative. And then since na as gay, I feel like I am associated with the moon. I feel like I take pride that I am associated with something powerful because of this piece na you've established authority and dominance sa moon, and then it tries to bring down patriarchy, something like that. Favorite ko yung yung Butuan Gangsters kasi there's a softness in the poem, and then I like na merge mo yung parang superficial magic factor, which is like the coin na parang may superstition na pag nakakita ka ng coin, and then you integrated that with something real, which is like poverty. So it's interesting to find that combination in that poem. Yeah.
Everyone. Okay, first, I want to praise the poet for his arrangement of the collection on the page and aurally. So there's that, there's this sonic component that I love. And also, parang the poet is very self-aware, has control, does not want to fall into these traps. And you can feel that kind of control. So like, for example, the arrangement on the page. So the first poem is Ars Poetica, but also is an elegy because it begins with, "Here lies the crane." Diba? So what's this, right? The second is an elegy. I'll go back to that for, like the ending, where should it end? The third and the fifth are lyric sequences. The first lyric sequence, number 3, has the tourist gaze. Number 5, the fifth lyric sequence is a migrant gaze, right? The emphasis there is about the Bisaya word for anger is suko. Suko. I live in a city whose language desecrates my native tongue. Kasi here it's suko, which is to surrender. Diba? So you have that entire migrant thing going on, living in a different city. the fourth one, I like that he placed the Japanese coastline between two lyric sequences. Diba? Kamura-mura yan eh. You know, yung talagang alam niya kung saan pumitik. How. So there's a choreography that I see here, and that's why I want to emphasize the self-awareness. And also, this Japanese coastline is also very Japanese because these questions are koans. There are questions, there are meditations that cannot be answered. Diba? If, parang, ano yun? The sound of, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And then here, if we found a way to reverse engineer the bomb, to gather all its ammunition in our cupped and careful hands until it is small enough to airlift home, will it also reverse engineer the bombing? What's your answer to that? Diba? So lahat yan, sinabi nga ng isang fellow, rhetorical. Diba? But it's very Japanese. These are koans. These are questions that you really can't answer. Kind of like that song by the New Radicals, Someday We'll Know, You'll Never Know. Basically, ganon. So it follows that same kind of form. The sixth one is a dramatic monologue. And here, you have the change of voice, diba? So you have this poet persona doing the politics, etc., etc. Then suddenly, nag-shift siya ng gender, nag-shift siya ng voice. Right? So it's a dramatic monologue, which is the favorite of everyone here. And then the seventh is the butuan, no? Gangsters, is a short lyric, and it's a locale poem. So, nandun tayo sa locale, which transitions into the eighth poem, which is a long lyric and a self-portrait. Diba? So, meron talagang intention. Diba? You can feel the intention. We were looking at several collections today, and sometimes we would start in the middle, diba? We would start in and then the power of the poet, especially a very self-aware poet, is to control the attention of the reader on the page, as in, ito talaga yung first page. We will look at the first poem. If you can do that, that's already half the battle won. When even if your readers and critics agree that this is the first poem that we want to read. So nandun siya. Okay, let's go to the revisions. Neil was very eloquent already had said everything about the themes. But I want to look at the elegy, spontaneous human combustion. I feel like it ends with, if I come out as luck holds no power here. There are no smoke alarms inside the gas chamber, which is to say, what dies is meant to die. Tapos na. After that, in the intersection of souls, ayoko na. Diba? Parang, I don't know if other panelists and fellows will agree with me. When I read it to the end of the page, I felt great.
Anticlimactic na siya.
Yeah. Tapos nung nagsalita na siya about, ayoko. I don't want to go to the intersection. I don't even want to go there. I don't want to go and end with, in how the living is left to clean up what greasy, fetid mess we leave behind. And I can't accept that. I can't accept the greasy, fetid mess. Diba? Parang, no. This is just beautiful.
Cut it there, then mawawala yung idea niya of how the acid holes in my stomach have been written, everything is like fated, there's no escape to it. I think it's probably rearrange and take the what is meant to die and put it at the end.
Yeah. Sige, pwede rin yun.
Yun lang. Ganun lang. Kasi yun yung pinakamagandang ending eh.
Yeah. Diba? Parang ang ganda-ganda ng ending eh. Which is to say, what dies is meant to die. Wala na akong masabi after that. I will not struggle. It's true. Diba? Parang, it's true. And I like
so
that.
Awful.
It's beautiful. I don't know what awful is anymore. Maybe I really have a problem with my judgment. I don't know what awful and beautiful is. Maybe they're the same thing for me. Yeah, I have to work on that. Heritage of all the poems, the two poems that I love, our heritage and Japanese coastline. Yung Japanese coastline, because of its brevity and the tricks that it uses, I like that. Talagang matalino siya. Pwede. Diba? Parang sarap niyang sabulutan, which I will do later. Diba? Heritage, on the other hand, because the poet has so much control and ang last ng restraint niya, he didn't want to fall into any traps. So as a reader, a little way in is beautiful. The revelation of the human being, diba? The family. Whether the family, if this is a real family or not, I don't care. Diba? But the fact that there are characters here and not just ideas, maganda siya in the collection to end. Diba? With something like, parang the poet is so aware na parang, ito, gagawin ko to. You think I'm all like this. No, I'll give you this. Diba? I can feel that, I can see that, and I will praise that. So, thank you so much for submitting this collection.
Can we hear from the video now? I seriously don't know how long it is.
10 minutes.
10, okay, so we'll leave us 20 more minutes. Oh, close. She's very happy.
Again? Okay, with the many awful things that are happening, I have a thing for points that lean towards social concerns. Points that are not only concerned about what is happening in your personal sphere, but are also reaching out to things that is not right about the world. Which is to say that I definitely like the projects at this point in the collection Factory of Alleged Virtues by Alfonso. It begins with an attempt to critique traditional or conventional poetics, this juxtaposition of theatrists and a local tourist's observations on colonialism and consumerism, a poem about language and so on, even something as commonplace in poetry as the moon, which is too often romanticized, is written through a social political lens. Which is so tempting. It would go anyway. I like the audacity in the point measurements, though I'm not quite sure exactly what the crane is standing for, or why the crane is thought by the author as the best metaphor for what it is he's trying to say. In this piece, we have a speaker who is a poet who appears to question, if not actually challenge tradition, which is a good thing. In this case, conventional poetic practices. I feel that the 5th and 6th lines are meant to express an important point in the argument. In its current state, though, these lines are pretty vague. The succeeding stanzas, 3rd and 4th, may also have to be further distilled, I feel, if I were, as a poet, to be swayed to empathize or be convinced by the strong ideas of the speaker. The second poem, there's a lot going on in spontaneous human combustion. We seem to have a number of theses, including what I understand as the main argument in the very first stanza. In this way, the poem seems to be a close relative to an exposition. Possibly what I find most interesting, because it is a rich place for interpretation, is the phrase, in the intersection of souls, which is not only the very first line of the piece calling attention to itself, but also is reiterated later in the 12th stanza. This phrase also appears to be the place where the meditation or reflection is coming from or is happening. On one hand, I don't quite get what this phrase means, but on the other hand, I'm also thinking might not be incredibly important anyway to clarify what this phrase means. So maybe the poet might like to rethink about keeping or not keeping this phrase, or how best to make it work towards the emphasis of the poem's main project. Some suggestions that may also generally apply to other poems. The word that in the sixth stanza of Spontaneous Human Combustion may be removed. Also, moving forward, the author can always consider not using the word that if the sentence or line can do without it. The word that, like having a lot of adjectives, tends to slacken a sentence or a line by unnecessarily delaying the arrival of an idea. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing. I'm saying that this is an option. And this is a feature of, one of the features of the word that when we use it in writing these kinds of poetry, these kinds of poems. So it is one of the things we can consider. There seems to be a lot of enjambments in this poem. Do these enjambments add another layer of complexity to the piece, or has it become a habit? There seems to be intentional exercises of alliteration in the seventh stanza of this poem, and for a brief moment there, reading the poem aloud, one might easily mispronounce greening for grinning, which is quite playful given the scene in the stanza. Is it the intention to be playful? How does the rhyme scheme affect the mood here? Do the rhymes lead or give us the feel of, quote, both swift and head-on as described in the succeeding stanza? Also, I feel there's a little more than necessary preaching moments in this poem, claims or arguments that may need more support. The appearance of tulips, which in flower speak means deep true love, comes pretty surprising. I wonder if this poem was specifically chosen. Also, if we readers, we have to be prepared at least a bit for the tulip's sudden appearance towards the end of the poem. The next piece, juxtaposing Hotel Luna, is a forever couplet poem. 3 lyric sequences, a total of about 72 lines, and all of them in couplets. All lines too have approximately the same visual lengths, and they have about 6 to 10 syllables each, which makes me ask, is this intentional? Or is the overall effect accidental? The piece looks a little too uniform, if you ask me, kind of predictable, visually speaking. Have you tried opening 2 drafts of the same poem in the word processor? So say you have Hotel Luna and then Hotel Luna 2. It's the same poem, but you place them side by side on the computer and then try to jazz up the lines, make them different from each other, and see how you feel about one version over the other, and how the sense of the poem differs just by changing how the lines are grouped together. You can also try after or while writing the poem, just zoom out the page so you can see how the lines look together. I keep thinking too, what's exactly being juxtaposed with the hotel in this poem. There are clues, but I'm not really sure. Some words might need some reconsideration. Words like ash, perched, stamina, hybrid, and also phrases like slice off, red bricks leaking out of concrete like cushion skin. Also, this piece might be a good point to start a conversation about varying ideas on what is poetic language. Is there such a thing as poetic language? Is a language in this poem poetic? Do line cuts make a poem? Overall, I like the personal is historical bent of this piece and the hedge that claim how we take the shape of our oppressors. Let me try to be brief about the remaining poems. Butuan Gangsters, I like that it is light. It's a wonderful piece. Study of anger ends beautifully. Though the words field trip may be replaced with something that better fits the idea. In the same way, some words in the Japanese prose line may need to be reconsidered. The poem Heritage is, to me, the most successful. May I suggest to shorten some lines of this poem just so they don't stick out a little too long than the others. Third stanza, there is humming and whistling, comma, dead American wailing from a turntable. Fourth stanza, first line, my elder siblings, comma, first and second drafts, period. Final stanza, second line, will still sit in the rooms of my suburban home. That's it. It's a beautiful piece.
20 more minutes. So John, would you like to say something?
I think yung isa pang strength ng collection is a strong sense of place. Yung collection ay nag-exist siya sa dalawang na lugar, no? Physically yung city sa yung Butuan, no? And yun ang gusto ko, kahit sa spontaneous combustion, halimbawa, gusto ko yung detail about yung car na nahulog sa beach, no? sa hometown, no? Ni-mention na yun, no? Kaya nung makita yung title na Butuan Gangsters, iniisip ko kung bakit gangster siya, hindi ko pa rin nag-guess. So baka mamaya pwede mo explain. Kasi ito yung parang kung merong poetry of place sa collection, ito to, yung Butuan Gangster. No? Pero disappointing siya, no? Kasi yun, gaya ng sinabi ni Ronald, is the weakest poem in the collection. No? Because dito parang biglang naging easy yung trick na ginamit ng poet, no? For example, no, yung kanyang pinaka-central metaphor yung coin, no, na mapulot sa kalsada and pag pinutpit sa lucky coin, diba yun lang talaga, no? So at hanggang doon lang siya, no? Kasi as a central image sa poem, dapat kasi umaalagwa siya doon sa image lang, no? Nagkaroon ako ng poetic insight, and I'm looking for the poetic insight, no, in the poem. So, pero gusto ko pa rin i-pursue sana, no, yung pagiging poetry of place niya, no, because I think that's really the intention, no, kasi kaya siguro title ginamit yung Butuan nun, no. I like the mention of copper here, no, because I think somewhere in Hinatuan Channel there's an island where there's copper mining, right? No? So, across Surigao, no? So, baka pwedeng paglaruan yun, no? Para maging earned siya, no? Na minention dito sa poem, no? And then sharpen pa yung paradox. Gusto ko yung paradox sa fourth stanza, yung minention yung slot machine, no? Sa isang lugar na walang Fox Never Gambled, no? So I like that, no? So yun, gawa ng paraan paano siya siguro mas mas nagkaroon ng mas malalim, no, na gamit yung imagery. And then yung sa sa heritage, no, medyo nahabaan ako, no? Kung ako, puputulin ko na yung tula sa after ng fourth stanza, no? Kaso lang, sinil ako sa round dahil sabi maganda raw yung seventh stanza, no? Yung, especially the last line, no? Kaya, pero pa rin, no? Baka pwede pa pa rin i-rethink, no? Baka pwedeng pag-aralan yung lines, no? Kaso lang, I know kasi for a fact that you are into spoken word, no? And spoken word naman, mas liberal tayo when it comes to ano, no? To let. Kasi halimbawa sa last sentence ng fourth stanza yung I am still being written as we speak. For me kasi it's a very strong ending. Kaya pag pumunta ka pa dun sa fifth stanza, like, and what is to rewrite but to erase, di ba? Parang it's stressing the obvious na, no? I find it on that the next line, no? So yun, baka pwedeng iklian.
Is there anything from the video we saw that we want to pick up on? Any of us? Do you remember what Shane was saying? I forgot.
Gangsters, I liked it.
She really liked the Butuan Gangsters poem.
Pero bakit gangsters?
Oh, you can answer it later. Maybe we'll have more comments. Anyone else? Steno, you started it up, oh, sorry. No one else? Mark, yes.
So I enjoy your poems very much, and so all my comments are somebody who's not a poet or writer or expert in this field. But the first question I had for you was, I was looking for the queer, and I wondered if it related back to something you said yesterday about having not yet come out in your home place. And I wondered if there was some, I mean, these poems, it seemed to me, could be, in some ways they're very hetero. Not that they need to announce themselves as being queer, but I just wondered about that. But I wanted to come back to a point that Marielle raised about the Mindanao kind of basis about it. And John, you were talking about the copper, but I think gold is also associated, maybe even in prehistoric times, right? There's Butuan gold there. And I wondered if there's something there that might help give the depth to that last thing, and actually tie a number of the themes through, which is partly about colonialism, right? And also in the poem, the Japanese poem. And it reminded me when Neil was talking about Adorno, also about Marx in his Capital, in a chapter called Primitive Accumulation, right? Which is about basically dispossession. And it seems to me that partly what you're writing about are various forms of dispossession, whether it's the dispossession of anger, the dispossession in a kind of literal sense, but then linking back to the Butuan one, you could read this as a kind of the false coin, right, of the gangster. And who's the real gangster here? It's kind of maybe the dispossession, the original dispossession, but also the problem of as your poem about Japan, I think, alerts us to, and this is always a problem for kind of the process of decolonizing. What is the possibility of recovery? And partly that's the question you're raising here. So just kind of some thoughts from a young poet, thinking about your politics within this and possible connections and deepenings, and then also inviting you to think about the kind of the queerness here. Where does that reside? Or help, maybe it's just we're trying to have too literal a reading in this in terms of the queer.
I have a trivia for Mark. So the name Butuan actually, as a gay angle to it, because it's a Visayan word buto, and then buto is an adult penis, no? And then when you say Butuan, it's a place where there are many adult penis. Where there's sprout, there are many penises.
We have abandoned penises.
We need a poem about that. Not coins, but about the buto. The many buto in buto.
But sometimes in Visayan context, when you say butuan, it refers to a male person who is mayabang, or boastful.
Cocky.
Kasi
Cocky.
yeah. And for babae, of course, pilatan.
Yes, I think so. We have probably 10 minutes now, and I think we can just ask Alfie to use all of them up, answering questions and bringing up points. Yes.
I guess I'll start with the youngsters. It can work in two ways. How I decided on the title. I feel like we live in. It was sort of class commentary as well, because I felt like we live in a time where to be charitable is to be subversive, therefore to be a gangster. Or conversely, the gangsters could refer to the people who are stifling the economy of my hometown. So that could also work both ways. But yeah,
So it's the ambivalence you have towards alms giving.
Yeah.
Or sort of giving out spare change, right? Either you're keeping them poor or you're helping them. Don't know.
As for the collection, yes.
The queer question, because it's for me, heritage is a queer poem.
Yeah.
And but you work your way towards that first with many philosophical ruminations, right? So is that, Richie pointed out the design of it, which is that you place the confessional poem in the end. Because you're trying to probably displace the notion that queerness is confessionalism through and through. You actually will, in fact, give that, but only after we get disabused, basically, and realize that the queer thing is actually the position, not the topic. But probably, this is not the complete work. And probably, if you're fleshing out the whole collection, there will be many, many more poems, and your heritage might be the very last or not. But it will be towards the end somewhat. But you're going to probably flesh out other queer poems? Is that part of the project?
I hope so. That's...
Like a Talahiban in Butuan kind of poem?
I'm not
Or in the University Hotel.
What do you call this? Yes, I feel like Richie saw through the whole process of me arranging them. Mostly because I felt like it was important. And then I knew from the get-go that I did tell a few fellows that I feel like I have the most hetero-sounding suite. And I feel like it was important.
Well, why do we do that? Is philosophizing heterosexual?
Which is kind of my point. That they are not gendered. The philosophies are not gendered.
I never thought it was heterosexual. I mean, because I'm used to reading gay poetry that's very profound sounding, or cerebral even. So it's not. It's a misconception or a stereotype we have. The confessional poetry is all emotion, no cerebral thinking at all.
It was calling out, I think, that stereotype.
Okay.
There was a comment on that. But I don't have many other words. Do you have questions, pa? I can wrap up that. I'm scared.
Relax. Maybe try prose poetry.
Yeah.
I think you might want to explore that further. That is Boduan. As it reads, no? The way you slap, parang tingin ko, you might want to...
Delineation seems artificial and it would actually better be rendered as paragraphs rather than stanzas. Yeah. Try it out. The suggestion of Shane, the best one for me, is that thing you can do with a word processor. That it used to be very sort of like a big production using the typewriter. You can, in fact, lay out the poem many different ways and then put them side by side and see which silhouette is most appealing visually, but which also creates different rhythms and expectations depending on how you create the stanzas and cut the lines. The enjambments that she's been talking about enjambments like forever. You do know what enjambments are, right? It's opposite of an end-stop line. An enjambed line is a line that does not end with a punctuation and proceeds down, so then you flush left again. And when you do that, you create a rhythmic effect, but you also create an effect in logic. You create sort of expectations and you bring the logic back, right? Or the sentence back to the beginning. And if you don't put an end stop to it, it means you want the rhythm to continue. So it's something that she talks about in human combustion, maraming ganon. You might reconsider that. the word that she keeps repeating is reconsider, right? Which is really the word that we all should be using, right? Because all of you, these are suggestions, right? To reconsider.
Thank you very much.
Francis, announcement?
Announcement lang. So on Thursday afternoon, after the very last session, we will have a photo shoot. You don't have to worry about your attire.